Unfortunately, I'm going to read to you quite a bit this morning, but there's just a lot here. So let's just jump right into it this morning. I understand you had a good conversation last week about Cain and Abel, and I'm sure we'll continue that today. So in chapter 4, it says, "Now the man had relations with his wife Eve," of course the man being Adam, had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain, and she said, "I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord." Again she gave birth to his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions, and the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. And then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it." So what's happening already here? What do we see with Cain here? What's the issue? Jealousy? Yeah, jealous. Abel's offering is accepted and his wasn't. And what's his sort of his attitude to it not being accepted? Yeah. Rather than being humbled by it, look at his attitude, and he's very upset by it. And then who comes and talks to Cain about that? Yeah. So we're still in a period, something we need to remember through this whole story, all the way up through Noah. We're still in a period where God comes down and visits with his creation. And we're still in a period where they're living in almost perfect condition. Now, God's cursed the ground as a result of sin, and he's booted Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. But the general creation, the dome that we'll talk about when we talk about the flood that will collapse and so on, they're still living in a fairly perfect living environment, and God's still walking among them. And yet, here's Cain in his heart, jealous, angry, all these things. So it's clear sin's in the world, even though they're still in a perfect state. It's also interesting here with Cain, something that we probably should have talked about with Eve. Before sin entered the world, Eve wanted something that she shouldn't have. Right? Before sin even entered the world, that was built into her, if you will. And here's Cain the same way, and God's calling him out on it. Sin's at your door. And sin's at our door. That's one of the things I know all of us deal with on a regular basis. If we're not careful, we get drawn into some particular desire, some particular emotional reaction, whatever it is. Sin is always at our door, and we have to master it. We can't say, as I said before, the devil made me do it. And so God calls him out on it, that you're all upset here. And there's we'll notice some other observations when we get to the questions as well that come out of these verses right here that people often, I think, skip over. But we'll move on for the time being. So from 8 to 12 then, we read, "Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about while they're in the field." Well, wait a minute. Cain told Abel his brother what?
Well, they were talking about that fact that his was accepted.
Yeah, it's pretty apparent. Cain confronted Abel, and was mad. And why is God like you and not me? You ever seen brother or sister or two brothers? Mom likes you more than me. That whole thing. This was one of those conversations that got way out of hand. Obviously, Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. So they got in a real heated exchange over it and killed him. He was mad enough, he killed him in the field. And then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" So what do we have there? Attitude. Big time attitude. It's not my responsibility. What do I care whether my brother's keeper? And he said, "What have you done?" The Lord said to him, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you, and you will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And so he's going to be booted out from where he's at, which they've already been booted out of the garden. So wherever they're living now, he's going to be cast. He's going to have to wander. He's not going to be able to stay put. What was he? He was a farmer, right? Grain and fruits and things. Now he's got to go wander out from there. So we see the attitude. Oh, my brother's keeper. So here he's mad with God that he didn't like his offering. Then he's mad with God that God says, well, where's your brother? You know, and we'll come back to that too. So we start in verse 13 for a minute. So here's Cain's response now to all of this from God. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Now wait a minute. He's murdered somebody, his own brother, actually. And yet being cast out to wander, the punishment, well, God should have just killed him right there then, I suppose. Huh? His punishment is too great to bear. So he's got to leave his home, his fields, all that. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I will be hidden, and I will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Well, you know, you guys talked about it probably last week. Who's going to find him? We've only had 2 births so far, right? We had Cain and Abel born, and one of them just got killed off. What's he worried about wandering around and people killing him? So the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him 7-fold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain that no one finding him would slay him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So we've gone from the garden then, and if you want to put the garden in the Middle East, we're now east of that. Cain had relations with his wife. Wait a minute. No women have been born yet. We've only had 2 guys born so far. Where does wife come from? And what you begin to see all through here is that all we're being given in the Bible is the genealogy leading up to Christ. All of the other stuff has been left out. It's not important because this is all about God's plan for redeeming man. That's what this is. If you want a book on Middle Eastern genealogies and history, you need to look somewhere else. This is about God's plan for man, and as we've said before, what's referred to as the scarlet thread of redemption that runs through the whole Bible. That's what we're seeing here. So Cain gets driven out, goes to the land of Nod, east of Eden, has relations with a wife, she conceives, and she gives birth to Enoch. Not the Enoch that we're going to talk about, but gives birth to Enoch, and he builds a city. Wow. For 4 people on the face of the earth, that's pretty good, isn't it? So he builds a city, and he names the city after the name of his son Enoch. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of this guy, and he became the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah became the father of Lamech. Now Lamech took to himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Now, what I want you to see, all the way back with Cain and Abel, what does it say about Abel in verse 4 up here? It says, Abel on his part also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. How would Abel get the fat portions off the livestock? Cut it. So we know we've got somebody cutting things. We've got somebody farming. Now we've got people playing musical instruments, making tents, livestock. These are not ignorant, cave-dwelling, whatever Neanderthals wandering around with their knuckles dragging on the ground and all that stuff that you hear. This is Adam, and Adam's still alive when all this is going on. So this is Wes talking now. I'm going to take a big leap here. God's taught them how to do these things. Where else would they have learned? Now, some of it they'll figure out on their own. But I think when God first of all, when God had Adam and Eve in the garden, they had to cultivate the garden. They would have had to have tools. They would have had to have knowledge about how to keep the fruit going and all that sort of thing. And then they go out of the garden, they still have that knowledge. These are not ignorant people. They're building cities. These aren't a bunch of just, like I say, Neanderthals dragging their wives behind them. These are organized civilization, if you will.
Also, you right before they got thrown out, God made clothes out of animal skins.
Yep.
So
They would have had some idea of how to do that as
They
well.
would have known how to
Yeah.
skin the animal
Yeah.
to make the clothes, and butcher
Yeah.
them, and
Exactly. So see all of that as we're reading through here, that these are, pardon me? No, that comes after the flood. We'll talk about that next, I think that's next week, actually. So Lamech took to himself the 2 wives, and then he has the 2 sons, and one is the tents and livestock, and the other play the pipe and lyre. So half the group are rock band people, and the other half actually work for a living, doing the livestock. And then as for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of instruments of bronze and iron. From an archaeological perspective, the knowledge of how to forge things and build kilns and get fires hot enough and find the ore and make the metal, and this is huge. I mean, this is huge. This is before the flood, all of this was going on. Bronze and iron, the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now, here you go. So this is Cain's descendants, and this will be about it for Cain's descendants. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, "Listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me." So here we got Cain at this end, murders his brother. Here's Lamech now, loses his temper, kills a guy at the other end. And I've killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. This guy's killed 2 people. One of them a boy. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 70-fold. So here's, what a heritage, if you will. It's like father, like son. Incredible. So this is Cain. Now Adam, then, it goes on to say, Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So once Cain slew Abel, men weren't calling on the name of the Lord until Seth came along and then had Enosh. And so we have the end of the day, the whole story of civilization, all the way through till Christ returns. You're either going to be a descendant of Cain or you're going to be a descendant of Seth. You're either going to call on the name of the Lord or you're not. And so now we're going to see the descendants of Seth, those who called on the name of the Lord. And where does this end up in chapter 6? Who's a descendant of Seth? Goes all the way through? Noah. We'll end up with Noah. So Seth, what we're going to see, what we saw with Cain through Lamech, we have murder to 2 murders at the end. Here we're going to have Seth all the way through these righteous people. We're going to Enoch, we're going to have Methuselah, we're going to end up with Noah. And through Noah, God will save the planet, if you will. So he creates male and female and blessed them and named them, and man in that day when they were created. And then I'm going to jump around a little. We're not going to have enough time. So we go over to verse 18. And in verse 18, we come to this. We're continuing the line of Seth now. Jared lives 162 years and became the father of Enoch. And that's the Enoch we know. Then Jared lived 800 years after he became the father of Enoch, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years. So we still continue to see this relationship with God. He walked with God, sons and daughters. So all the days, then walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And we'll talk about we'll talk about that here, I think. So one of the prevailing thoughts is that the final 2 witnesses, at the end of the story of Revelation, is Elijah. You either hear Elijah and Enoch, or you hear Elijah and Moses, the law and the prophets, represented in those 2 people, or you hear Elijah and Enoch because those 2 haven't been killed, or perhaps the 2 witnesses are 2 people we don't yet know. For example, when Christ was walking the face of the earth, many thought he was John the Baptist, as an example. Or Zacharias. Was it Zacharias? John the Baptist. there's a verse, Hebrews, I think is it 9:27? It's appointed unto man to die once? Yeah.
And inasmuch as it is appointed for man to die once, and after this comes judgment.
Yeah. So the line of reasoning here goes, well, Enoch didn't die. God took him up. And neither does Elijah. God takes him up. Well, they both still have to die. So that must be the two that come back at the end. It's possible. I'm going to argue that that verse is teaching something else. What else would it be teaching? It's appointed unto man once to die. There's no reincarnation. And I think that's the lesson that it's talking about. If God wants to bring two righteous men to heaven and not have them experience death in the process, God's certainly entitled to do that. I don't know that it says that all men must die. It says it's appointed to man once to die. And I think what it's talking about is that whole school of thought over reincarnation, which is, of course, not true. Okay, yeah, we're going to move right along here. So Methuselah lived 187 years and became the father of Lamech. Then Methuselah lived 782 years after he became the father of Lamech, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah, saying, "This will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground, which the Lord has cursed." So there's still this relationship with God. Then Lamech lived 595 years after he became the father of Noah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And if you do the math, Methuselah is still alive. So Methuselah lived to see his son die, and actually it probably happened more than once, given the long lifespans and large numbers of children. But Methuselah is still alive. Noah was 500 years old, and he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then if we jump over quickly to I don't have it in front of me, and we're going to run short on time. Noah's 600 when the floods come, which is what we'll look at next week. So he's 500. I wanted to do a quick math exercise with you. Did you all see that in the homework? How we can tell that Methuselah died the year of the flood? So, yeah, when you get a chance, take a look at question 14. And what you'll find in the end is that Methuselah would have died the year of the flood. And since he wasn't a part of the evil generation that God was going to bring judgment on, it's reasonable to assume he would have died before the flood began. But that means he would have seen Noah build the ark, the entire 100 years that Noah was building the ark. Lamech would have seen most of it. I think Lamech lived 85 years into that period, and he dies about 15 years before the flood. I'm round numbers. You can do the math. It's pretty easy there, actually, when you get done with it. But Methuselah would have lived to see the ark through, and even perhaps some of the animals loaded on. We don't know, but he would have clearly died prior to the flood. Yeah, that would have been neat, huh? So let's quickly look at the questions that we had. Was Cain the first child born to Adam and Eve after they were banned from the garden? Well, we don't know. There is no way of knowing, other than we know that when God kicks Cain out, there is a world of people out there already. So it's reasonable to assume that Cain was not the first child, or if he was the first, many, many, many were born right after that. Who knows? We know that Eve is referred to in the Bible. In fact, I believe you guys would have had it last week as the mother of all creation. So that we know that all the children came. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, well, now you got brothers and sisters marrying each other. Well, you did, but you had it happening in a perfect condition at the time. And as that population grows bigger and bigger and bigger, the intermarriage thing wouldn't have been the big problem that we make it out to be. And if you think about it in a more cultural sense, if you're going to have, let's take Italian or French or, pick some civilization, if you're going to stay pure in that, you're going to marry inside that group, right? And that's what Abraham wanted as well. He wanted his descendants to stay Hebrew. You're going to have intermarriage at some level. And during the beginning with Adam and Eve in the perfect environment, it doesn't bother me at all that they would have. How else are you going to? What did God tell Adam and Eve to do? Populate the earth. How else are you going to do it? If you only got two people, I mean, and you take some time, get a piece of paper, and just imagine that once a year Eve had a baby, and the first 20 years she's had 20 children. Okay, and she's still a spring chicken because they lived up into 900 years old.
Yeah.
20 years now, the first children that she's had, now they can have babies. Now, and they're not all going to be girls. You can come up with whatever math you want to come up with, but very quickly you can get to a large population, particularly in a perfect environment. Look at our world population, because once it's geometric. Once you start getting a group of people reproducing, it can be, Anyway, won't go there. So no, Cain. We don't know if Cain was the firstborn, but we know there were plenty of others. How old was Abel when he died? Who found that? How old was Abel? It's a good Bible trivia question. What was the name of the woman at the well when Christ walked up, the Samaritan woman? Don't know. We don't know what the age Abel was either. But it's clear they were both male adults. They were working fields. He was obviously able to butcher a cow and, raise herds and so on, but we don't have an age. By simply studying the story of Cain and Abel, what can we infer about man, his abilities, his culture, family structure? And we've talked about that some already. It was very organized. This wasn't helter-skelter. It was very organized. They even knew to form into cities and all kinds of things. Very well educated. Was able, and that's another thing. We also know they knew how to worship God. I mean, they knew how to worship God. It says when the time appointed came, Cain took Abel took their offerings. So organized worship was also there.
God came down and talked to him. He told him what he wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why he was
Yeah.
upset with Cain, because Cain didn't listen.
Yeah. Was Abel a man of faith? Was Abel a follower of God? And so we have three verses of Hebrews 11:4.
By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks, even though he is dead.
Yeah. So very clearly. Then we have Matthew 23:35.
That on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zachariah, son of...
Yeah, Zechariah, that's fine. Okay, and then we have Luke 11:50 and 51.
Therefore this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that has been shed since the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah,
Yeah.
who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for it all.
Yep. So clearly, Abel was seen as a righteous person, full of faith, and is listed as the first of a long line who will be killed innocently throughout the time that we live in this cursed world. Since the Ten Commandments had not yet been given by God to Moses, I hope you knew that, by the way. The Ten Commandments weren't around just yet. Did Cain understand what he had done was wrong? Clearly he knew. Clearly he knew. We see that in Genesis verse 9. Had Cain been warned about his sin? Yes, he'd been warned. We read that, how God had called and told him sin was knocking at the door. Of course he knew. So he can't be not held accountable, and he knew it in the end. Because of Adam and Eve's sin, had God withdrawn from mankind and not allowed anyone to approach him? No, we've talked about this. There were still very much easy access to God, if you will, and he very much was still a part of his creation in that way. Was Abel Cain's only brother? No, Genesis 5:4 says that Adam had other sons and daughters. So that wasn't the only brother. There was who knows how many. While not expressly stated, what could have been wrong with Cain's offering, or was there something wrong that did not relate to the offering but to the person? So was it the offering or was it the person?
It was hard. It was, you just gave portions, parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was what was in his heart.
That's what-
Okay, there's two schools of thought.
Although, also, Cain, didn't the Lord want a blood offering?
Yeah. Yeah, why didn't Cain go to his brother and buy a cow, or buy an offering or whatever, or trade, or whatever. Yeah. But he didn't want to have to go to his brother to get an offering. So, oh no, I'm taking this is all a part of that attitude. That, no, I know what God wants, and he wants this over here instead. Yeah, so there's two schools of thought. One is, of course, his attitude was wrong. It was completely inappropriate. But the other part of it is that he was supposed to have had a blood sacrifice. Cain's only brother. What was Cain worried about after God judged his sin, and he was worried that he was going to get killed by somebody, because he was being cast out, if you will. So wherever he was seen as in, and wherever he was going was a foreign land, if you will. Cain feared for his life as he wandered the earth, afraid that others would kill him. Where would other people populating the earth have come from? And we've talked about this before, that Adam and Eve had lots and lots of children. And we don't know the age of Cain and Abel. Were they 800 years old at the time, or 400, or all of that sort of thing. Then the story of Cain and Abel is recorded in Genesis to illustrate the difference between those who worship God and those who do not. It also serves as a record of the first murder committed in God's creation. And then why is Seth's name specifically included in the Genesis record? And we can see now why, because Seth's descendants will eventually be Noah. And his descendants demonstrate the correct relationship with God. They all kept a relationship with God all the way through to Noah. The story of Cain illustrated, Enoch became the father of Methuselah and a bloodline leading to Noah. What else is noteworthy about Enoch? And we've talked about this already. He didn't die. There are two people mentioned in the Bible who never experienced death in that sense. And then how much time has elapsed? And again, if you go to the website under question 14, when Ron posts the answers, I'll do the math for you. And it's all right. You can do it yourself just by using Scripture. But Methuselah would have lived right up to just before the flood, which I believe is next week's lesson. And it'll be fascinating for you as well, because it has yet to rain on the earth. For as old as the earth is at that point, it has yet to rain on it. Not sure they even had boats. Ark. What's an ark? And one of the things I'm going to talk about next week is what's a cubit. And you'll learn some new things about cubits next week. Key aspect in archaeology, by the way, is knowing what a cubit is when you go dig all these things up. So.
You know, they said that the ark could hold approximately 125,000 sheep.
Could have been, yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that next week.
By the cubit thing, they measured it out. And they said I would hold 125,000.
Well, one of the things, too, we need to remember, which, again, we'll mention next week, is that more than likely what went into the ark were young babies. Maybe not babies, but not mature either, that sort of thing. Especially the larger end. But all of them were because they're going to enter a world destroyed and have to be able to survive in that. So it's going to be the healthy ones that are going to go in the ark.
Camel was pretty big.
Yeah, 10 months old.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
older than we were.
Yeah, out here? Yeah. Well, baby elephant is no tiny thing. There are plenty of animals that are huge when they're born. Next week will be fun, because I'm pretty sure next week is the Noah and the flood. A lot of good stuff in there. But we'll look at what's a cubit. And maybe Bill Cosby will pop in and explain it to us. I know, you're all too young to remember his, what's a cubit, Lord? Okay. Boy, I just ran through that in a hurry, didn't we? I apologize for that.
Play that before.
What's that? Oh, play it beforehand? I've actually got it on my, you can download Bill Cosby off of iTunes. Yeah. It's a hoot. What's a cubit, Lord? The other thing that's cool to watch is it Steve Carroll? Which I don't necessarily care so much for the movie. But is it Steve Almighty? Is it Steve Almighty? Is that his name in the movie?
Oh, Evan.
Evan. Evan Almighty? Evan Almighty.
Or sometimes, that was Bruce Almighty, and then there was Evan.
Or something, yeah. But in any case, he's the one where they build that life-size ark. And that's fascinating to look at. Man, yeah. So
Genesis is actually building one out in
I think they are life-size as well, I believe, isn't it? Yeah. That's another website you can go to. Yeah. Young Earth creationist guy. Yeah. I agree with some of Ken's stuff and some I don't. But the Ark, yeah, I think they're doing a full-size Ark, I believe. Yeah. The Netherlands? Yeah, it's big. It's big. It's no tiny little boat. And it would have had to have been. Not to mention, everybody's always all hung up about the animals. You got to feed them for a year. And they probably had waste byproducts. I mean, it wasn't a perfect Earth, you know. I mean, they do process things. You have to do all of that, and then, of course, living, and then they had to be able to eat themselves and so on. So it would have had to, fascinating how it would have gotten built so that they could have lived in there and cared for the animals and had all the...
Separate the male and the female because there wasn't enough room for them to end up having babies, right? Read that
I don't know.
because
Yeah, I don't know.
overloaded.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that. In a year, they couldn't have had too many. I mean, rabbits, I guess, I don't know what their cycle is, but I mean, most animals, their reproductive cycle is 9 months, 10 months, 12 months. Is it hamsters? Goldfish. We got lots of goldfish. Okay, let's go ahead and stand. We'll be dismissed this morning.